Hi, I was Derek here talking with famous people. I was prompted next by Callum, who's impatient, and oh no, that doesn't say next. It says wrecked. Well, they would beat me with their experience. Yes, they would. They have sticks. They name them experience, and they beat you with them. So the next topic is let's talk about reciprocal burdens. So one thing that I encounter a lot as I argue with people on the internet is this issue of failing to understand reciprocal burdens. Reciprocal burdens simply says that an argument should be tested before you make it, in general, I think, to see what other things that mechanism allows to happen that are probably unintended consequences. So, for example, it came up today. I'm not trying. I love Chad's thinking, his argumentation, everything. I was really impressed when I was listening to the interview that Zachary did of him about his politics. But one argument that he was making was about the historical context of the Constitution. And my position is that's not a good argument to make, because if you are going to justify things by historical context, well, then why don't we go ahead and just use the Bible as our law? You know, it's older. There's maybe just as good historical context. If you want to argue about which historical context is better, then we end up with this mushmash of interpretive battles that don't accomplish anything. Another example of the reciprocal burdens thing. When I was arguing with Hami the other day in a video that I enjoy watching a lot, I've watched it like 4 times, and that I normally don't do that anymore, although I used to watch my own videos quite a bit. Normally I watch them once when I upload them, and then that's it. But that one I really enjoyed it. There's an issue of reciprocal burdens, right? Hami begins the video attempting to argue against religious texts. The argument that says Muslims are bad because the religious text is bad. The religious text justifies violence. That's an argument that sometimes people make against Muslims for whatever reason, or against Islam. Well, I wasn't making that argument, but Hami responded to it anyway, and he responded by pointing out correctly that lots of religious books advocate in favor of violence, and there's no reason why we ought to single out Islam simply because their book advocates for violence. It's not a matter of whether the book advocates for violence or not. Well, that's the correct position. I agree. It's not a matter of it, and the reason it's not is because reciprocal burdens disproves it. That's obviously not the mechanism by which we determine whether this thing is a threat. If it were, any language that threatened violence would be considered worth any conclusion. So it's good to say, yeah, that's not a strong argument. It's not an argument to make. But that's why it's not. It fails the reciprocal burdens test. Then he proceeded to talk about the terrorist organizations and how they're not representative of the group as a whole. And he's right again. The reason is, of course, it fails the reciprocal burdens test again. We don't want to hold all of America accountable because a group of 20 people someplace go and commit some mass crime. We don't assume that all of America is criminals. Same thing with the Middle East. We don't want to assume that all the people are terrorists just because some of the people engage in terrorist acts. I don't like the word at all in general. The word terrorist implies that there's something special about what they're doing. People who are terrorists are either mass murdering criminals or they are states engaging in war. There's no such thing as terrorism. It's a bullshit distinction that doesn't mean anything. So, regardless of that, though, that's not the argument I was making. And again, the reason I wasn't making it because of the reciprocal burdens test. The arguments I did make do pass the reciprocal burdens test. They oppose freedom of expression. Well, but you oppose it too. No, we don't. We favor it. But some instances aren't quite as good. Well, we have freedom of expression. I can say whatever I want about Muhammad, and they can't. I can say I'm an atheist if I wanted to. They can't. I can say I'm a Zoroastrian if I want. They can't. So the thing is, that passes the reciprocal burdens test. That's why it's a better argument. When you are considering making arguments for a position, understand additionally, there's an additional fallacy that came up in some of Hami's argumentation and some of his comment, or one of his comments after the fact, which was about sounding like something. Like, well, you sound like a neocon, or that's a neocon argument, or something like that. My arguments ought to be, and must be, I won't permit them not to be, adjudicated on their merits, not on their similarity to somebody else's argument that you don't like the person. Additionally, the argument has to be adjudicated on its merits, not on the person's merits. There's something called a genetic fallacy that says because the Nazis did it, it's bad. But of course, the Nazis ate breakfast. That doesn't mean eating breakfast is bad. And there's an additional one that's more commonly known, which is the ad hominem fallacy, that just says, you're attacking the individual, not the argument. These are basic argumentation flaws that are rampant throughout society. And in my opinion, the best thing we can do is to call them out when spotted and have those bad arguments enter the fray. Have them enter the fray and have them get defeated. It's the best thing we can possibly do. That's why I think we can use free expression additionally as a good test for our willingness to be allied with somebody. If they promote and uphold unfettered free expression as a cultural value, then we know they value individualism. And if they have free and fair elections, then we know we can count on them to have some, with both things combined, you pretty much guarantee justice. At least it upholds the value of justice. So, in my mind, there's a concrete criterion we can use to determine whether somebody qualifies as an ally or not, and whether they're one of us or not. It gives us a clear criterion to understand which cultures are acceptable and which cultures are not. So, a free expression is the ultimate defense of nobody being able to force their views on anybody else, because it says all views are open and available to be heard and to be scrutinized. When you have an authoritarian situation like an Islamic country, you've got a situation where some views are not okay to be voiced, and they're not subject to public scrutiny. They're assumed bad, but they're much more powerful because they're not subject to scrutiny if they are bad. And if they're oppressed because they are good, but they threaten the dominant paradigm, then that undermines the ability of society to progress. The most important thing that we can do to progress society in general is to fight out all these ideas in the public discourse. Make sure debates happen, make sure the arguments happen between people, because no matter what else happens, I guarantee you Hami won't be making those arguments again. Not those same arguments. He'll make different ones. They might still not be the best arguments, or maybe they will be. Who knows? But he won't make those same bad arguments again, because those bad arguments lost.